Ladies and gents, welcome back to the Relax Running Podcast. Tyson Popplestone here. I hope you're doing well this Friday. Hey, before we get into today's episode, I wanted to just give a quick shout out to our episode sponsor, one of our newest sponsor in Pillar Performance, a brand committed to micronutrition, making sure that you and I rock up to the start line fit and healthy, training complemented. You want to check that out, get your discount. You can get the code and the link to that in the description to this episode. Also wanted to remind you that we are currently at the end of September, or a week away from the end of September 2024 at the time that I'm recording this. And so if you wanted to get into that early bird price for the Falls Creek Run Camp happening in January, you've got a week to do it. So make sure you snap that up. Today, I wanted to take a little pivot, share with you, I've been reflecting on the fact that I've been in running now since I was 13 years old, or 12 really. It's 25 years of running, and it constantly blows my mind how many lessons I'm continually learning and how many things I've learnt time and time again that I still forget and then implement. And I wanted to boil it all down for my sake, for my own sake, to just get my own head around it, but also for you guys on the podcast this week. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. I've written down quite a number of running lessons that you may or may not have heard before. As I said, my goal through sharing some of these strategies with you is to hopefully eliminate years of guesswork, or at least help you learn from my own dumb mistakes, and some not so dumb mistakes that I just didn't quite happen to know at the time. So that's exactly what we'll do. As I said, I started running at the age of 12 years old. I'm now 37, 25 years of running, which is kind of wild. It's, I guess it's just a part of it's in my genes now. It's in my blood. I absolutely love it most of the time. Sometimes still have some of those days where I'm like, all right, I totally understand people's lack of love for running. Some days it's hard and clunky and just feels yuck. So if you ever feel like that, obviously you're in perfectly good company. I know exactly how you feel. And I know based on the Olympians and professional runners and coaches and those in and around the sport of running, that you're not alone. All right. So take a little bit of solace in that. My entry into the world of running came from, I was a pretty good junior footballer here in Aussie rules football, which is very running dependent. If you're a professional midfielder in the world of football, you could run anywhere from sort of 10 to 15 kilometers. What's that, like around about 10 miles in the course of a game? And naturally, as a result of that, I knew that running around the boys that I was with, I was pretty good at it. Not so much the sprints. I was around middle of the field with the sprints. But when it came to the longer stuff over preseason, I started to excel a little bit there. Over the course of a couple of years of people recognizing this, I got signed up somehow to the West Australian State Championships. I think I was under 14, maybe under 13. It was in the year 2000, and I came out there and won. I think I was the bottom age group, and it kind of blew my mind. I remember seeing my mum was all excited, and she had a strut in her step, which naturally meant I had a strut in my step. And I just thought that it was just a golden paved road from then. I was like, all right, I've found my sport. I know how to be good at it. Just do as much of this running as you can, and then I guess you'll be the best in the world. And that was where I was at for far too long. That mindset of, all right, let's just throw as much of this training at my body that I can handle. And you know where it's going. It doesn't always end well. And that was what I had to navigate for the next 25 years. And in some ways, I'm still navigating that in a different regard now. Just there's always a new lesson that pops up. There's always a curveball that gets thrown at you. A new niggle, a new strain, a new form of training. It's endless. And I feel as though part of the fun of this is the fact that it's a constant learning project. Just when you get to a point where you think you've figured it out, bang, something else pops up and you're like, all right, well, now I've got to navigate my way through this. And so with all of that said, in no particular order, let's jump into the list of things that I've written down that I've learnt over the last 25 years of running. First and foremost, let's start with this. Every single athlete is different. While there's certain traits and characteristics of being really good at distance running, consistency is one of them. We'll talk about that one soon. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to training. I remember as a junior guy, in fact, I could probably show you. I got a book like this. This has been re-gifted from one of the athletes that I coach, Mark, last year. But this book is called Top Distance Runners of the Century: Motivation, Pain, Success, World-Class Athletes Tell All. And you flick through, There's pages on Daniel Komen, there's Haile Gebrselassie, there's Brendan Foster, there's Paula Ring, there's Alberto Kova, Sebastian Coe, Ron Clark. It's training secrets of the best of the best. And one thing that I realized really quickly in my search for the best training method of all time is that every single one of those athletes has some slightly different approach to training. And it is so incredibly frustrating because you want to go to the secret books and go, oh, if I just do this and do that for 20 years, I'll be the best in the world. Or if I just do this and do that for 6 months, my marathon PB will improve. Unfortunately, and fortunately, it's part of the fun and part of the problem. Distance running doesn't reward all people equally. In fact, some people can handle 100-mile weeks, while some people can handle 200-mile weeks. I mean, you look at the Olympics over the marathon, and you'll see someone like Cam Levins from Canada who's just throwing some of the most insane amount of distance running into his training calendar. In fact, I would bet that you look at the mileage of any Olympic marathoner, he would probably take the cake with how far they're running, and yet there's no correlation between how many runs and how far you run and how fast you are. Obviously, there is a point of diminishing return. What you need to figure out is what training do you respond well to? And you're only going to do this through trial and error. I think you get little glimpses along the way. Like I knew quite early that I had a pretty good capacity to handle fairly decent mileage. And I just knew that because I was doing it and not having any trouble. I was pulling up good. Whereas young athletes around me at the time were a little bit more vulnerable. So you'll see little cues along the way that makes you think, oh, okay, this seems to be a standout feature of my training that I can handle. Maybe you operate well with a few more speed sessions injected into your week, regardless of the distance that you're training for. Maybe you're the kind of athlete who, like me, enjoys a little bit of that longer, slower volume. Unfortunately, the only way to find this out is you can take some cues from the best runners in the world, but until you put that into practice, you're not going to know exactly what it is that you respond well to. So I say that it's both freeing and frustrating. It's frustrating because, sure, it's not as linear as what we might hope for. It's not as clear or clean cut as what we might anticipate. We'd like just to go, all right, this works, do that. Unfortunately, it's a little bit of trial and error. Now, the reason this is frustrating is because it means there's going to be some soreness, there'll be some tenderness, there might be some injuries and some niggles, there might be some blisters and some frustrations, but unless you, the only way to navigate your way through that is through the experience. But over the course of time and consistency with your own running training, one thing that you'll quickly recognize is if you're paying attention, certain things will start to stand out. So don't get too caught up on what everyone on Instagram is saying, myself included. Take it all with a grain of salt, put it into practice and find out what your body responds to. If you're constantly fatigued, injured, you got niggles, you're constantly sick, very good chance that something might need to be adjusted. If you don't have a coach or someone who's been in the sport for a long time, I really recommend that you get on top of that. Get someone that you trust to help guide the way, because eliminating some of the guesswork or just having a voice of reason who's slightly separated from the emotional connection that you have to your running is really beneficial. The second point that I've written down, I touched on it very briefly. Consistency is key. And I'll start this point by stealing a Steve Moneghetti expression. He says, I think it's Steve Moneghetti, he talks about the phone book theory. The phone book theory, if you haven't heard it before, it's, and we're going back to the late 80s or late 90s maybe now, we're a very digital age, but the story went that if you got a phone book, every single page of that phone book was incredibly thin. But over the course of just layering and layering and layering and layering each page of that phone book, it becomes more durable, more resilient. You can tear one single page very easily, but a whole book becomes incredibly difficult. Consistency in your running training is exactly that. It's beneficial at times to do slightly less than what you think you're capable of, whether that's in volume, intensity, duration, because sometimes your body's ability to respond to slightly less and do that consistently over a long period of time helps to make you a more durable athlete. If you're constantly pushing yourself to the edge and you're going over the edge, you're getting injuries and niggles and sickness and things, your body's ability to actually adjust and strengthen over the course of your training is going to be hampered. As Mark Allen, I think it was, or Joe Friel, had someone on the podcast recently who said, if you're not out there training, your body's not getting faster. In fact, you're getting slower. So a little bit of a step back in those things I mentioned, the volume, intensity, duration, might be something to consider with a long-term view in mind. If you can have that long-term view in mind, do slightly less for a longer period of time, you'll be amazed at the capacity that your body has to adjust to that. Now, one key theme which has been very beneficial to me in my own running, I knew this subconsciously before we started talking about it more scientifically, is the Zone 2 approach to training. Obviously, a really trending topic right now in the world of distance running, but it's not really that miraculous. It suggests that around about, say, roughly 80% of your training is done at a conversational pace, at quite an easy pace. The reason this is beneficial for a distance runner is because through approaching the longer distance slightly off your intensity level that you could hit, conversational pace means your body's ability to handle that training is well absorbed. Your aerobic fitness, your cardiovascular fitness is being developed. So if you're looking for consistency, one of the key recommendations that I won't spend too much time talking about in this video today is considering the Zone 2 training method. If you haven't checked it out yet, check out 6-time Ironman world champ Mark Allen, or the Grips podcast episode with me here at Relax Running. I'll link it in the description. He talks about how he was applying this strategy incredibly successfully in the very early parts of his career, the late 80s, early 90s, with incredible results. The third thing is that rest and recovery is just as important as the hard training. Now, for whatever reason, endurance athletes, whether you're a triathlete, whether you're a distance runner, whether you're a cyclist, it really doesn't matter. We're wired in a way which we love that hard work. As long as we're out there pounding the pavement, absolutely pushing ourselves to the limit, we feel as though we're making progress. It is true, but it's true in context of the fact we need recovery. If you're just constantly doing that each and every day, like I've said, injuries, niggles, fatigue, performance plateaus are going to be inevitable. You've got to figure out what that balance between rest and effort is. I mentioned the 80-20 principle. That's a really well-received approach to training. It's quite easy to digest. It's quite easy to understand. Have a look at your training load. And if too many of your training days are absolutely just filled with just hard work and you're not taking time to recover up, there's a very good chance you're not getting the best out of yourself. On those recovery days, it doesn't have to be a day completely off exercise. Personally, I love to get out and do a little bit of yoga. I might even get in and do some strength, which we'll talk about soon. Get a massage, get out in the sunshine. Just find something that fills your tank. Maybe you're an artist and you like to go and paint. The idea is to switch off from training, not only mentally, but physically. You can double those things together or combine those things together and just give yourself a little bit of distance so that tomorrow, when you get back involved, you have hit reset, refresh. Your body is ready to absorb the harder work that you're ready to throw at it. Sometimes if you're just doing or attempting quality or too high quality every single session, your body's ability to actually hit that quality has been hampered because naturally you're fatigued. Give yourself a little bit of a chance to absorb the work, come back out to the quality session and watch how much that improves. The fourth thing I want to talk about is the idea of technique. Now, in the world of running, it's so frustrating because too many of us completely ignore the importance of running effortlessly. Now, you don't have to look far to see the top athletes in the world, whether a 100-meter runner or a marathon runner and beyond, are also, if they're the best in the world, they're also seemingly always the most relaxed. It doesn't matter if you look at a Usain Bolt or an Eliud Kipchoge. They're using their energy well. An untrained eye can see this. If you've never done any work on technique, I highly encourage you to check it out, either through me or people like Lawrence Van Lingen who have been on the podcast. There are some simple cues that you can observe in your own running training or in your own running technique, more to the point, that are going to be having an impact on your running performance. A few of these things you want to watch out for is where tension is built up. A lot of athletes store tension, especially when they're fatigued, stressed, or just trying really, really hard. They'll store it through their jaw, through their neck, through their shoulders, through their back, through their hands. And when you feel that tension, I mean, you don't have to be a genius to recognize it's going to take more oxygen for your body to be able to actually put one foot in front of the other. You can see this right now. Just squeeze your hands, squeeze your neck, squeeze your shoulder blades back, and just try and take a deep breath. You can feel when your chest is out, your ability to actually absorb oxygen or breathe oxygen in is hampered. But there's certain cues that you can apply to that, which is going to really help you relax when you're under a lot of pressure. Now, the first thing that I would encourage you to do, and I would encourage you more to go and check out some of the YouTube videos we've done on this subject, because we are, in the nature of time, we've got more time to actually commit to some of the more refined details of how to improve your running technique there. But for the sake of time in this one, I'll just give you a quick crossover that most often, the standout feature that you want to look for is when tension is building up throughout the course of your day. The benefit of just looking for tension in your body throughout the course of the day is it forces you to start to pay attention to when it is you notice it build up. A lot of the time, we don't notice it because we haven't been in a position, we haven't trained to actually observe it. A lot of the time when you're stressed, when you're frustrated, that's where you'll start to recognize it. One of the most helpful, simple steps that you can take to actually feel that release once you notice it is just feel it release with an exhale. The same is true when you're out there running. You notice the tension build, and exhale is a great way to reduce it. Now, this doesn't help with the actual physiology of the movement that you're making. Obviously, the angle of your body, the way your foot is landing on the ground, things like cadence, also key factors in your running performance. But for the sake of tip number one, identify tension in your body throughout the day and when you're running, and learn to alleviate that with a breath. If you want more help on this, or if you want to have some more practical guidance on the other areas of your physiology you can focus on when you're trying to improve your running, get in touch with me, or as I said, people like Lawrence Van Lingen. There's some really great advice available that's going to make dramatic changes to not only how you feel when you run, but to the results that you see over a long period of time when you're out there running. The fifth thing I want to talk about is so many athletes are fit, but they're not healthy. You look at the endurance world and you'll notice consistently that I heard recently that distance athletes have the highest decay rate in any sporting field. I don't know if it's true, but it definitely stood out to me as being true. The reason that is because how often do we justify a hard effort on the track or on the racetrack with some sugary treat? Or by the nature of marathon running, we're constantly just filling ourselves with highly refined sugars in the name of carb building. A lot of the time, the athletes that I work with, they are very focused on maintaining energy levels throughout the course of a run, but they're not focused on actually building a layer of health beneath their running training. If we're not healthy, not only are we going to miss training through illness and sickness, but our ability to maintain training over a long course of time is going to be severely hampered. So rather than just trying to go out there and do the instant thing, replace the sugars that we're losing, I would encourage you to take some time to look at your diet. If you want a really great book recommendation, I'm sending this one to everyone I love at the moment. There's no doubt you're included in that. A new book by Casey Means called Good Energy, looking at simple ways that we can increase the body's health through not only diet and through exercise, but just offering some simple solutions to navigate our way through this world of highly processed, highly refined foods that we often eat without even recognizing, which is having a really negative impact on our health. If you haven't checked it out, highly recommend you do that. If you're not healthy, your ability to perform well over a long term in this sport is going to be severely hampered. The sixth thing is that small steps are actually big steps. Sometimes we get so caught up in the goals that we've set for ourselves that the progress never seems to go far enough or fast enough. And it's not until we actually look back at the last 5 years or 10 years that we have an opportunity to recognize the ground that we've made up in terms of how much faster or how much further we're running. So don't get caught up on the small picture where you're constantly so zoomed into the details of your day-to-day stuff that you don't recognize the huge breakthroughs that you've been making over the last 18 months to 10 years. You decide the time frame. This is a real stress release as well, because often when we approach a sport or it doesn't matter. I was speaking to a guy on my other podcast this morning about learning, Scott Young, and he spoke about that sometimes we are so focused on instant gratification that we fail to recognize that long-term progress. So zoom out a little bit, have a bit of a longer-term time frame. It allows you to take your time to appreciate the little breakthroughs, to accept the challenges, to learn from what it is that you're doing, but celebrate the fact that you've made improvements over the last 10 years. And if you haven't, figure out how you can make adjustments to your own training that are going to see you more grateful, more happy, more excited about the progress over the next 10 years. Often it's just a failure of perspective, which stops us from actually seeing how far it is that we've come in the sport. The next one I wanted to talk about is the importance of strength. Obviously, running is a highly impactful sport. There's a great deal of force. I think it's like 7 times our body weight comes through our calves with each and every step. So perhaps it's no surprise that if we fail to look after the strength of our muscles and joints and bones through going to the gym with a well-established or well-designed gym program, particular or specific to your sport, our body is going to be more vulnerable to things like injury. One thing that I think has been very beneficial in my own running over the last 12 months after dealing with a couple of calf issues last year for a variety of reasons. If you haven't heard about that, listen to some of the Chasing 229 episodes where I go into it more, is that I started to develop a more structured program for my endurance sports designed by Angelo Gingerelli. Finish Strong is an endurance training guide in the gym it's a gym training guide, strength training guide for endurance athletes to use in the gym. This is going to really focus on cultivating the muscles and the joints that we use most consistently so that as we start to increase our mileage, our body's ability to absorb that and adjust to it is built on a better foundation. So if you haven't got a gym routine, I really encourage you to check that out. The next one I want to talk about is this idea of data versus intuition, or looking at the stats versus looking at how we actually feel. Forever, if you've been listening to the podcast since it started, one thing I used to always speak about is that I'm not a data guy. The data stuff never used to interest me. I had no interest in wearables, and everything that I did was based on feeling. And now, to a large degree, a lot of what I do is still based on feeling, but I cannot argue with the points that so many of the guests on this particular podcast, Marco Altini, Owen Everett, there's Gordo Byrne, there's so many people who have come on here and just spoken about the benefits of looking at data. Sure, it's important to go out and pay attention to how your body feels, but every now and then it's nice to have something like a heart rate monitor to tell you that, hey, even though you think you're feeling good today or you feel like you want to go faster, this is a zone 2 run. You're currently in zone 4. More than that, recently, based on that book, Good Energy, I've been wearing my Garmin, which is, I think, an entry-level wearable when it comes to things like monitoring sleep. But I've been taking some time to actually monitor my sleep consistency, to monitor my heart rate, to look at how many steps and things I'm taking in a day, particularly on the days where I'm currently resting from running. And it just keeps you accountable to make sure that, like the point I touched on briefly a moment ago, that we're healthy, not just fit. So if you're doing all the training and ignoring your sleep, obviously there's going to be a gap in your progress. So really take some time to combine those two factors. Listen to how your body feels and be guided by some of the data. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. The next thing I want to talk about is get yourself a community. If you don't have a group to run with, or you don't have a particular friend that you can get out and run with, running is so much more enjoyable when you've got people to do it with. I love going out from time to time, particularly when my kids have been absolutely crazy, just to go out and clear my head and be by myself. But the truth is my favorite running memories are often with my good friends, my best mate Jocka, some old mates like Cale Simons that I grew up with running. We had some absolute cracker stories that we still talk about 20 years later about what we did in the training world as young kids. And there's a reason for that. It's fun. But more than that, there's a real practical side to it. We can actually get the opportunity to go out and be challenged and to chase down people who are faster than us and to celebrate the wins and be comforted through the low points. There is a reason that community is such an important part of our health. I can see that from a performance perspective in my own running experience. Here's a good one for you. I've got my eye on the clock. I'm only going to do a couple more. Injuries are often advice. Now, I touched on this earlier, and at the risk of just over-repeating it, this Good Energy book has been such a game changer to me. Casey Means talks about how symptoms of our body, whether it's a runny nose or a blocked nose, are often a sign that there's something underlying which is not quite right. If we're constantly sick, maybe it's food, maybe it's sleep, maybe it's stress, maybe it's a combination of all of these things. Injuries are exactly the same. A lot of people like to rest on the idea that, I'm injured, I'm just not designed for running. It's a very lazy thought process to have. I would encourage you, rather than just throwing a blanket rule over, I've got old man calves, or I'm getting older, or my body's just not designed, figure out exactly what it is that you've been doing and tinker with it, play with it, adjust it. There is a strategy or an approach that works for every single athlete on the planet. So don't buy into this idea that, just because you're whatever your age is, that you can't do it effectively anymore. That's a very lazy, very slack approach. And often, I understand why people take that approach, because it's easier just to put a blanket over it and name it. I would encourage you to do some investigation by yourself. Figure out people who have been through what you've been through and find out, what did they do specifically. Success leaves clues for everyone. You're definitely not exempt for that. The truth is, there's no end to the amount of lessons that I've learned over the last 25 years of running. Some of them are very personal and emotional. Some of them very practical and skill-oriented. But over time, I think the best method for improvement is an educated guess. Do your research, apply it, see the results, and edit it, and then repeat that process. If you can continually do that, you're going to come to a point where you recognize that the system you've got for yourself is strong. Don't get so caught up on Instagram or looking at friends and what they can currently do. Jordan Peterson says it great. Don't compare yourself to who someone is today. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday. And I think that's a really good approach to take for this training, because it makes you appreciate the small but significant breakthroughs that you can make in your own running over time. Guys, if you do need any help with coaching, with training programs, I've just uploaded, I'm in the process of uploading a whole range of training programs for the marathon, from the 5K to the marathon and beyond. If you want to check those out, I've made them super reasonably priced over at relaxedrunning.com. Hit training plans. Need anything else, I'm always just an email away. Guys, thank you so much for the show reviews that have been coming in as well on Apple. If you could leave a review, honestly, 5 stars mean the most. If you could just leave some honest feedback on what you've got out of the show, that goes so far in helping this show reach new people. For some reason, over at Spotify, the show's registered twice, but wherever you listen to this show on Spotify, a review there would be great as well. In the meantime, guys, happy training. Always appreciate the fact you stopped by and listened to me and my thoughts on running. I've got more guests coming up in the next couple of weeks, but for now, happy training, and I'll see you all here again next week.